Over the last couple of days.
We've been talking, you might have been talking about it the last couple of days. I've been talking about it for months. Yeah, and it's happened indeed. We're talking about Iran, the fourth largest oil reserves in the world. Oil prices. Hello there. Oil prices slide to, well, lower than $28 a barrel. All of this as investors weigh up the lifting of the sanctions against Iran. Of course, up to 500,000 barrels per day of Iranian crude could be added to the already saturated markets. All of this after US and European leaders ended, of course, a crippling embargo put in place over Tehran's nuclear program. Let me just add, already the world is producing 1 million more barrels a day than it actually needs. So add that, add Iran's oil, 1.5 million. Prices. But Iran's president, let me talk about this, Hassan Rouhani, he's already called, of course, all of this an economic turning point. He said it's time for the country to build and grow, promising that 2016 will be a prosperous year for the country. Mr. Rouhani says the country needs, or Iran needs, up to $50 billion in foreign investment per year to reach its ultimate goal or target of 8%. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? 8% annual growth. It is, of course, a new beginning at an ideal time because Iran could be seen as one of the largest untapped markets in the world with a very large youthful population, enormous. And the economic dividend for Iran and its potential business partners is huge. The US estimates that more than $100 billion of funds could be unblocked. The oil, the gas industry, the banking sector, transport and tourism services will all likely benefit from, of course, the foreign investment. We're going to keep a lot more across this coming up on World Business Report in about 20 minutes' time. Follow me on Twitter. Tweet me. I'll tweet you back. You can get me at BBC Aaron. But I know, Geeta, you've got more coming up on Iran right now.
Absolutely, Iran. Thanks so much. Aaron, sorry. Thanks very much. Well, we can look now at the political implications. Iran has denounced these new sanctions imposed by the United States on Iranian interests linked to the country's ballistic missile program. On Sunday, the US Treasury placed fresh sanctions on 11 Iranian individuals and entities in response to a recent ballistic missile test there. Well, that move came on the day that President Obama described the nuclear deal with Iran as a victory for what he called smart diplomacy. He had been urging Iranians to make the most of a new relationship with the West after previous international sanctions against Iran, of course, have been lifted, as we've been hearing. Nicholas Burns was a lead US negotiator on Iran's nuclear program under the George W. Bush administration. He explained why it had proven so challenging to reach a deal with Iran.
I think the Iranians were determined to build a nuclear weapons capability over the last 10 years. And in the Bush administration, we actually didn't get to negotiations with Iran. We offered negotiations with our European partners and the Russians and Chinese. The Iranians turned us down. I think they felt that they could avoid the kind of negotiations that would limit their nuclear future. I think that two things really turned the tide here. One was, of course, the worldwide sanctions against Iran, the Security Council resolutions passed by the United Nations, the European oil and gas embargo, the financial sanctions. They clearly had a very damaging impact on the Iranian economy. Second was the fact that the United States and Israel, I think, made it clear to the Iranians that if they moved towards the acquisition of a nuclear weapon, that the United States certainly would use force, and Israel made the same threat. Those two factors, I think, caused the Iranians to reconsider their options. That's why they entered negotiations 2 years ago. And I think that was the critical turning point.
Nicholas Burns there. Well, with me is Amir Peva from the BBC's Persian service and Vincent Ni from our Chinese service. I mean, if I can begin with you, Monday morning here in London, just sum up the reaction, first of all, to this sanctions lifting, the nuclear sanctions lifting, although we have had this ballistic move as well. But this is massive change, isn't it, for Iran?
It is indeed. For Iran, for world markets, we heard from Aaron what it has done to oil prices, which is very significant. Iran increasing its oil exports, but also for Iran itself, the stock market has been up for the last couple of days. The Iranian currency has appreciated. There is a sense of jubilation, confidence about the future, and the president came out very confidently, putting out a vision of massive growth for the next 5 years, which entails a lot of foreign direct investment, up to $50 billion a year, and also that staggering growth target that we heard about.
Now, China, Vincent, has been dealing with Iran despite the sanctions, effectively, hasn't it? It imports, it's the top oil buyer from Iran. But why are we seeing this visit not only to Iran but also to Saudi this week?
Well, I think for a start, China doesn't want to take sides in the Middle Eastern conflicts. I mean, if you remember, back in last April, President Xi Jinping was supposed to visit both Egypt and Saudi Arabia, but because of the conflict in Yemen, China cancelled this trip. So analysts say this is because China doesn't want to take sides in any of the conflicts in the Middle East and don't want to get involved. Now, for a long time, China has been seen closer to Saudi Arabia than to Iran, and the U.S. had complained about it. So this sanction is actually, quite good for China to get involved into Middle Eastern affairs, Iran and Saudi Arabia further, and play a bigger role in alleviating this tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Amir, do you think China can? I mean, how much does the trade change affect the politics? Because the reason why the rest of the world is also looking on is because of the effects on Syria and the whole Middle East tension, the migrants, etc.
Well, China has been Iran's largest buyer of crude oil and one of the biggest trading partners. What will probably change now that we can trade with the European Union, and even technically with every country in the world, as China will find new competition in the Iranian market, namely from European firms. Whether that will affect the politics in medium term or longer term remains to be seen. Generally, China is considered to be a reliable ally to Iran, also politically, because throughout sanctions, China stayed on while everyone else left the Iranian market, and also China supported Iran politically in the UN and elsewhere. So Iran, I think, for a long time will be relying on China, although in the Iranian market there will be a fierce competition.
Is the Uyghur question at all part of this for China? I mean, every country now is worried about radicalisation within its own population. But also, how much do you think China wants to get involved with the diplomacy? I mean, does it feel the West has all along been on the wrong side effect? On the Saudi side perhaps more, and it's now seeing the light?
Well, I think radical Muslim is definitely on top of the agenda for President's visit. Although the Chinese officials told us, their main purpose of this trip is about economics rather than politics. But the concern is quite deep in far western region of Xinjiang, that a lot of people are reportedly joined the Islamic State to fight. So China also wants to get a grip on what is going on with these major powers in the Middle Eastern region.
If I can just go back to you, for ordinary people, the change in sanctions, how worried are people about the ballistic sanctions for a start? But overall, people's everyday life, what difference is this going to make now?
The only worry is a bit of trust, because the average Iranians are led to believe now that there's been a nuclear deal, that the nuclear sanctions are removed, and the ties between Iran and US are improving. Although very, very slowly, but they're improving. All of a sudden, slapping a new set of sanctions will probably jeopardize that move. But these sanctions were already drafted. We did expect them, and the ballistic agreement is outside the nuclear deal. So Iran already knew if it did go ahead with testing those missiles that there will be new sanctions. And there is an understanding these sanctions will not violate the technicality of the nuclear deal. But of course, again, it's a matter of trust. But in practical terms, not much changing for the average Iranians.
OK, Amir, thanks very much, Vincent. Many thanks.